Emma Carter arrived at the headquarters of Tetradyne Technologies on a cold Monday morning in New York City. The wind sliced through the streets like invisible blades, and her discreet steps echoed through the mirrored lobby of the company. She wore a plain gray blazer, black dress pants, and shoes that made no sound. Her brown hair was pulled into a simple bun, with no makeup, and a temporary badge clipped to her left pocket. To any casual observer, she was just another face among the many new hires who wandered weekly through the sterile halls of the towering glass and steel building. Inside the elevator, she stood beside two suited men who didn't even acknowledge her presence. They laughed as they talked about a recent meeting with the head of customer support, Charles Becker, and about some intern who couldn't tell the difference between protocol and a post-it note. Emma didn't react. Her eyes remained down, fixed on the digital screen displaying the floor numbers. On the 26th floor, she stepped out in silence. The customer support department stretched across a vast open space, lit by cold overhead lights, with white cubicle partitions and desks cluttered with dual monitors, headsets, and stacks of papers. A woman named Donna, the team supervisor, greeted her with a rushed smile and a printed onboarding manual in hand. "You must be Emma, right? Good, let's get straight to it. Here are your logins. Your desk is number 32, right there in the corner. Try not to bother anyone with too many questions, okay? Most of what you need is in that manual. Welcome." Emma nodded, thanked her quietly, and walked to her station. It was a bare desk, with no personal touches, and a slightly wobbly chair. She began exploring the company systems with the ease of someone who had handled much more sophisticated platforms. Still, she feigned uncertainty, clicking slowly, letting questions linger like she was still adapting. She watched more than she acted. Around her, co-workers kept their distance. They whispered. A woman named Julie, at the next desk over, whispered to another employee, "That new girl hasn't said a word. Bet she doesn't even know what she's doing here." Another guy, Ryan, let out a muffled laugh when he saw Emma deliberately make a small typo in a customer reply. In those first few days, Emma chose to be invisible. She silently documented every attitude, every expression, every condescending command. Charles Becker, the department head, barely acknowledged her. When he did, his tone was clipped, cold, impatient. "This is basic stuff, Emma. I hope you're not going to take long to catch up. Or, I don't want any errors in the reports. And if you're going to ask for help, think twice before bothering someone." Emma simply nodded, her smile barely changing. Inside, she recorded it all, as if each moment were a blank page being filled with quiet truths. She spent her days immersed in customer tickets, answering questions, resolving technical issues, escalating when needed, always with precision, yet without drawing attention. She didn't seek praise. In fact, it seemed as though she was trying to blend into the very walls of the office. During lunch, she sat alone in the cafeteria. The monthly all-hands meeting was held on the first Friday of every month in the main conference room on the 30th floor, a wide space with a panoramic view of Manhattan, rows of chairs, and a sleek digital board that projected data points and corporate slides no one ever really read. Emma arrived early, as she always did, and sat quietly near the back, clutching a notepad that had remained mostly blank since her first day. Around her, the room buzzed with idle chatter, coffee cups, and the low hum of anticipation not for the meeting itself, but for the moment it would finally be over. Charles Becker entered 5 minutes late, holding his phone and grinning as though he'd already won whatever game was about to be played. He took his place at the front, adjusted his tie, and began a slide-heavy presentation full of corporate metrics, red arrows, and the usual inflated praise for the same few employees who always got recognition. Halfway through the presentation, he paused. "Now," he said, his voice booming through the microphone, "I want to talk about performance in the customer support department. Some of you are doing an excellent job, some of you, not so much." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Emma remained still. Charles scanned the room with a theatrical slowness, then suddenly pointed. "Emma. Emma Carter, right?" All eyes turned. The room fell silent. She nodded once. "Yes." "Great," Charles continued, with a thin, sarcastic smile. "Since you've joined, we've had, let's just say, mixed results. I looked over your ticket logs. Not bad, but frankly, nothing special. In fact, it made me wonder, do we really need someone doing what you're doing if anyone else could pick it up in 5 minutes? A few people chuckled. Some looked down. One man near the window actually laughed out loud. Emma didn't blink. She didn't speak. She simply kept her eyes on Charles, her face neutral, as though this moment were just another line in a script. Charles seemed emboldened by her silence. He took a few slow steps forward. Listen, I'm all for giving people a chance. But let's be honest. We're not running a charity here. We need people who add value. And right now, I'm not convinced you've figured out how to do that. The laughter was louder this time. Laughter that didn't echo joy, but a mix of discomfort and cruelty, the kind people use when they don't know whether to laugh or look away. She looks like she's about to cry, Julie whispered, not very quietly. But Emma didn't cry. She smiled. It was a small, precise smile. Not one of submission or embarrassment. It was calm, almost detached, like someone observing something predictable unfold exactly as expected. She made no move to interrupt. No defensive gestures. No visible sign that Charles's words had landed any deeper than a passing breeze. Charles noticed, but misread her composure. Well, maybe this will help light a fire under you. I'll be assigning someone to review your work more closely over the next week. We'll see if that helps clarify your place here. He turned back to the screen and advanced the slide. The room hesitated, unsure if the performance was over. Slowly, conversations resumed, some forced, others whispering about what just happened. The meeting went on, budget breakdowns, vague goals, and the illusion of forward momentum. Emma sat still for the rest of it. She took no notes. She didn't need to. When the meeting ended, people stood and filed out, avoiding her gaze. Only Donna approached her briefly, placing a hand on her shoulder. Don't take it personally, she said. Charles is just like that. Emma looked up, her tone soft. Thank you, Donna. I understand. And she did understand, far more than anyone in that room could imagine. This moment, for all its brutality, was not a surprise. She had anticipated something like this. Not because she was vulnerable, but because she was exactly the opposite. Because men like Charles Becker always reached for humiliation when they felt the need to display dominance. It was a pattern, predictable, tiresome, and incredibly useful to those who knew how to wait. Later that day, she returned to her desk, completed her tasks with quiet efficiency, and said nothing about what had happened. But her fingers typed a little faster. Her eyes observed more closely. The smile, when it came again, was smaller, sharper, more deliberate. She had just been called useless in front of an entire floor of employees. Laughed at. Dismissed. Threatened with oversight. And she had smiled. That night, the office emptied slowly under the city's golden dusk. Emma stayed late, finishing every pending ticket, organizing her inbox, and reviewing the meeting recording. Yes, she had discreetly captured audio from her phone. Not out of revenge. Out of necessity. At exactly 8 o'clock in the evening, she closed her laptop, gathered her things, and walked out without saying a word. The weekend brought a gentle warmth to the otherwise indifferent skyline of New York. While most employees of Tetradyne Technologies used the break to distance themselves from their fluorescent-lit routines, Emma Carter remained exactly as she had been all week, silent, composed, and intentional. Yet, as she sat by the window of a modest cafe in the East Village, sipping plain tea and watching the city breathe, her mind wandered not to what had happened, but to what was coming. The truth about Emma was simple, yet hidden with surgical precision. She was not merely a quiet, overlooked entry-level employee trying to find her footing in a corporate maze. She was the only daughter of Robert Carter, a man known in business circles as the Quiet Storm. A billionaire with a reputation for absolute discretion and unmatched strategic vision, Robert had built and acquired dozens of companies over the years. His face was rarely seen in public, his name even less so in headlines. But his influence rippled across entire industries like a tide no one saw coming until it was already inside the building. 3 weeks prior to Emma's first day at Tetradyne, Robert Carter had finalized the purchase of a controlling share in the company. It was a quiet acquisition, spread across several shell entities and investment arms, designed to avoid market speculation and employee panic. Few at Tetradyne even noticed the change in majority ownership. Those who did assumed it was just another routine reshuffling of shareholders. But for Robert, this wasn't just another acquisition. It was personal. He had chosen Tetradyne not for its tech or its numbers, but for what he'd heard in the background. Whispers from former employees, murmurings in leadership circles, quiet complaints buried in exit interviews, signs of a corporate culture so rigid, so toxic, that innovation had started to rot under layers of fear and unchecked egos. He needed someone inside. Someone who could see it from the ground up, not through the polished lens of reports and boardroom presentations. That someone had been Emma. When he had proposed the idea, she hadn't hesitated. There was no trace of privilege in her reaction, no resistance to the notion of starting at the very bottom. Emma had never been a woman of spectacle. She understood the power of patience, of silence, of letting people reveal themselves when they believed no one important was watching. She had changed her appearance slightly, nothing drastic, just enough to blend in. No designer clothes. No expensive accessories. She had taken a train to her first day like everyone else. She had followed every protocol, attended every basic training session, filled out forms with the same bureaucracy that swallowed everyone else's time. And now, she was gathering evidence. Not just of Charles Becker's arrogance, but of the deeper decay he represented, a structure built on intimidation, where ambition was confused with cruelty, and leadership was a performance of ego rather than service. She kept a journal. Not on company devices, but in a personal notebook she carried home every night. It contained names, patterns, phrases, moments. She detailed every time an employee was dismissed without justification, every time a woman was interrupted, every time someone's work was claimed by someone else. She wasn't just watching, she was preparing. What no one at Tetradyne knew, and what very few even in the Carter inner circle understood, was that Emma was not being tested. She was the test. On Sunday evening, as the city began winding down and office buildings flickered back to life in preparation for another workweek, Emma sat on her apartment floor surrounded by notes. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't angry. She was methodical. She highlighted patterns. She cross-referenced emails. She reviewed call logs and meeting recordings, not just of her interactions, but of others too, quietly collected from shared drives, forwarded messages, and careless slips made in open office banter. She had begun to understand not just the problem, but its architecture. At the heart of it was Charles Becker. But around him stood a system that enabled him, excused him, even admired him. Emma wasn't planning to take down a man. She was preparing to dissect a culture, piece by piece, until what remained was something worth building on. By midnight, she had everything stored. The digital files were encrypted. The physical notes were locked in a drawer. Her temporary badge rested on her desk beside a plain black keycard that no one else at Tetradyne had seen. It unlocked only one room. And she would use it when the time was right. Monday morning arrived with a strange stillness in the air, as if the building itself sensed that something beneath its surface had begun to shift. Emma returned to her desk with the same quiet posture, her eyes calm, her presence unassuming. But Charles Becker was not done with her, not even close. His humiliation of her during the company-wide meeting had stirred something unpleasant in him, a hunger to reinforce the hierarchy he believed she had threatened by simply existing without fear. That morning, he walked through the floor with the exaggerated confidence of a man performing for an invisible audience. He stopped at Emma's desk, his tone clipped and dismissive. "You're on document scanning this week," he said. "We've got 100 paper files from our archives that need to be digitized and cross-referenced. Start with the customer complaints folder. Some of those go back over a decade." He didn't wait for a reply. He dropped a heavy box of dusty, disorganized files beside her chair and walked off. Across the floor, co-workers exchanged glances, some amused, others uncomfortable. Julie smirked. Ryan shook his head and muttered something that made the person next to him laugh. Emma calmly pulled the box toward her and opened the lid. The smell of old paper filled the air. She didn't protest. She didn't even sigh. She simply began the task, not out of obedience, but because every sheet inside those folders was a thread in the fabric of the company she was preparing to unravel. Charles escalated his campaign over the following days. She was excluded from team meetings without notice. Group lunches were scheduled deliberately without her. He reassigned her to answer repetitive tickets that had already been resolved, then reprimanded her for wasting time. Once, when she submitted a suggestion to improve response time based on her observations, he returned the document with a single line written in red ink: "Next time, just do your job." Emma added that note to her growing collection of evidence. She had stopped pretending to struggle. She performed her tasks with quiet precision, never faster than necessary, never more confidently than expected. But behind the composed mask, her awareness grew sharper. She began noticing things others had grown numb to: the way Donna flinched every time Charles raised his voice, the subtle eye rolls from junior staff when he interrupted them, the unexplained departures of talented team members who had simply stopped showing up. One afternoon, Emma found herself assigned to clean out the storage room, a task so beneath her actual capabilities that even the janitorial staff looked at her with a mix of pity and confusion. The room was cramped and dimly lit, filled with old equipment and outdated promotional materials. While moving a box, she found a crumpled folder containing handwritten notes, printouts, and internal memos, all related to a harassment claim made 3 years earlier by a woman named Rachel Torres. The notes revealed inconsistencies, dismissals without investigation, and Charles's personal annotations that bordered on contempt. Emma read every page. She scanned the documents with her personal device and carefully placed them back where she found them. By Thursday, the tension around her had become almost visible. Charles avoided speaking to her directly unless it was to assign another degrading task. Other employees had begun to watch her with a mix of curiosity and caution. She spoke little, but her silence was no longer seen as shyness. It had weight now. It created discomfort. That evening, as most of the office prepared to leave, Emma approached a quiet corner where a junior employee named Leo sat alone. He was soft-spoken, diligent, and frequently overlooked. She sat beside him and asked, "Have you ever had a suggestion ignored by Charles?" Leo hesitated, then laughed nervously. "Once, I emailed him about a system error that was causing ticket duplications. He replied 3 weeks later and said I should stop blaming my mistakes on software bugs." Emma smiled softly. "Would you be willing to tell me about it in detail?" "Off the record." Leo blinked, confused. "Why?" "Because it matters," she said. "And not just for you." He nodded slowly. "Yeah. Sure. I'll tell you." It was the first of many conversations she would have that week, quiet exchanges, always private, always voluntary. She never pushed. She only listened. But every story, every moment of dismissal, of degradation, of manipulation, she remembered them all. By Friday, Emma had filled an entire notebook with incidents that reached far beyond her own experience. She had created a map, not just of Charles's abuse, but of the systems and silences that had allowed it to thrive. She knew the language now, the patterns, the rhythm of fear disguised as structure. And yet, through it all, she remained invisible. Exactly as planned. It was late Friday afternoon when the message arrived, a brief notification at the bottom right of Emma's screen, innocuous to anyone else, yet carrying a weight that shifted the entire atmosphere around her. The subject line was simple: confidential, effective Monday. The sender was R. Carter. No one around her noticed the shift in her posture, the subtle stillness in her fingers as she paused mid-keystroke, or the way her eyes lingered on the message for just a moment longer than usual before clicking. She opened the email with the same detached calm she carried through every hour of her days at Tetradyne. Inside, there was a short message from her father, written in his usual clipped and efficient tone: "Emma, attached is the finalized organizational chart, effective Monday morning. Do not respond. Do not act. Observe until the moment is right." Our attached was a single-page PDF. Emma opened it. At the top of the chart, in bold letters, sat a name no one in the office had ever spoken in connection with power: Emma Carter, Chief Executive Officer. Below her, a cascade of boxes showed the restructured leadership model. New departments. Merged roles. Interim audits. And most notably, a conspicuously absent name, Charles Becker. She read it once. Then closed the document. Her face remained composed. There was no flush of triumph, no flicker of satisfaction. It was a quiet acknowledgement, not of victory, but of responsibility. The time for observation was nearly over. Monday would begin a reckoning, not out of revenge, but necessity. Still seated at her desk, she calmly returned to her open ticket, responded to a customer inquiry about a billing error, and resolved it within seconds. Around her, the office bustled with the usual end-of-week distractions, Donna preparing reports no one would read, Ryan joking loudly with two other analysts, Julie scrolling through her phone, and Charles behind closed glass doors, gesturing furiously on a call. No one knew. She did not log off early. She did not glance around the office with hidden smugness or signal anything unusual. Instead, she stayed until 6 o'clock in the evening, filing her final task report of the week. Her notebook remained in her bag, her encrypted files untouched on her drive, her expression unchanged. But as she stood to leave, something subtle shifted in her demeanor, a stillness not of passivity, but of containment. Controlled, deliberate. She walked past the glass walls of Charles's office without looking in, down the hall, into the elevator, and out into the fading light of the city. The subway was quieter than usual. Emma sat near the window, her thoughts neither racing nor still, they moved with purpose, like gears turning in a machine whose timing had been calculated down to the second. She didn't tell anyone about the email. Not her few acquaintances at work, not even the trusted legal consultants who had helped her gather background for what was to come. Her silence was her strategy, her discipline, her edge. That night, in her small but elegant apartment on the Upper West Side, she placed the printed copy of the organizational chart in a folder labeled Implementation Phase 1. Alongside it, she arranged a checklist, legal confirmations, HR restructures, department audits, communication protocols, and media statements, all pre-prepared, all finalized. Every step had been mapped with surgical precision. She had not taken this lightly. Becoming CEO of a company like Tetradyne was not a trophy to be placed on a mantle. It was a promise, one that demanded clarity, strength, and above all, restraint. Her father had taught her that the most powerful moves were made without spectacle. Before going to bed, she reviewed her notebook again. The pages were worn from handling, but meticulously organized. Color-coded tabs marked themes: abuse of authority, gender bias, performance manipulation, psychological intimidation. She added one final note to the back page: Monday, initiate stage 1. Do not look back. She slept peacefully that night. No anxiety. No anticipation. Just readiness. Saturday and Sunday passed without incident. Emma did not visit the office. She did not review any additional data. She spent time walking the city, observing. People moved with purpose and urgency, never knowing the stories unfolding silently beside them. She visited a small bookstore in Soho, ate dinner at a quiet restaurant where no one knew her name, and went home without ceremony. And then, Monday arrived. Monday morning dawned crisp and bright, the kind of early autumn day that tricked New Yorkers into thinking the city could be peaceful. Emma arrived at the office before most of the staff, walking through the front doors of Tetradyne Technologies with the same quiet demeanor she had worn since her first day. Her blazer was navy today, her blouse ivory, her steps measured. She nodded to the security guard, took the elevator alone, and walked into the 26th floor like nothing had changed. And for everyone else, nothing had, not yet. Charles Becker was already in the building. His car had pulled into the garage at exactly 7:30 that morning, as usual. He had skipped breakfast, fueled only by caffeine and control. He had plans for the week, a quarterly review, a few performance threats to deliver, and a new intern to assign to data cleanup. What he did not expect was to find Emma Carter speaking during the morning huddle. It happened in the open area near the main workstations, a 10-minute meeting Donna hosted every Monday. A quick overview of priorities, updates from the weekend, and the assignments ahead. Charles rarely joined, considering it beneath his level of concern. But this morning, he wandered closer, coffee in hand, just in time to hear Emma's voice, calm, clear, and articulate. I noticed several tickets being delayed due to system lags, she was saying. I ran some diagnostics Friday night and found a recurring loop in the automated response generator. I created a temporary fix and documented it here. She held up a report, concise, well-organized. Undeniable. Donna blinked. Ryan frowned. Julie whispered something under her breath. Charles stepped forward. Emma. Her name, spoken with that familiar clipped condescension, silenced the group. She turned to face him, meeting his gaze directly. What do you think you're doing? He asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. I'm sharing a solution to a documented delay in our process, she replied without hesitation. Charles's face hardened. No one asked you to dig into system code. That's not your role. You're here to follow instructions, not to redesign workflows. She remained still. With respect, I didn't redesign anything. I patched a problem that was affecting our SLA metrics. It was already impacting client satisfaction scores. The room was now fully quiet. I started between Emma and Charles like spectators at a match neither side had agreed to fight, yet somehow, both had shown up for. Charles took a step closer. You don't speak in meetings. You take notes and keep quiet. That's how this team works. Emma's voice didn't rise. Then maybe that's the problem. Gasps weren't audible, but the silence said enough. Charles's expression shifted from anger to something more primal. Let me make something perfectly clear, he said, raising his voice. Women like you need to understand when to stay quiet. You don't walk in here and start telling people how to fix things. You're not in charge. You're not special. And if I wanted a lesson on systems, I'd ask someone who actually belongs in this department. His voice cracked across the floor like a whip. For a second, no one moved. Emma slowly closed her folder and placed it on the nearest desk. Thank you for clarifying, she said softly. Then she walked away. Just like that. She didn't argue. She didn't flinch. She didn't acknowledge the stares or the tension that spread like ink through water. She simply left the group, walked back to her desk, logged off her computer, and picked up her bag. It was 10 o'clock in the morning. Charles stood frozen in place, chest heaving, unsure whether he'd won something or lost everything. Julie smirked. Ryan looked confused. Donna looked horrified. By 11, the rumors had started. Emma had left early. Emma had snapped. Emma was probably quitting. Emma had pushed Charles too far. But no one, not even Charles, expected her to return the next morning. And they definitely didn't expect how she would return. Emma arrived at the building at 7 o'clock in the morning, long before most of the staff. This time, she did not enter through the side lobby reserved for general employees. She stepped through the main executive entrance, her black blazer crisp, tailored, and unmissable. Her heels echoed sharply against the polished marble floor. There was nothing hesitant about her movements, no effort to blend in, no reason to hide. The front desk receptionist stood abruptly when he saw her approach. Ms. Carter, he said, his voice uncertain, do you need assistance? I'm heading to the president's suite, she replied evenly. Everything should be prepared. He didn't ask questions. She moved past him with ease, badge in hand, not the temporary visitor badge, but a new black keycard that unlocked only one destination, the executive wing on the top floor. When the elevator opened, Emma was greeted by silence and glass. The suite was immaculate, a long corridor lined with private boardrooms, a central atrium with city views, and the president's office at the far end, where the new organizational charts had already been distributed, one neatly placed on every seat around the meeting table. At exactly 8 o'clock, the senior directors arrived. They were not from her department. They were not Charles's peers. These were the true decision-makers of Tetradyne Technologies, men and women who, until that morning, believed the company's new owner, Robert Carter, was a silent investor with no immediate plans for disruption. Then they saw Emma seated at the head of the table. Some looked confused. Others, visibly concerned. A few scanned the nameplate in front of her, as if to confirm it wasn't a mistake. Emma Carter, Chief Executive Officer. She didn't wait for their questions. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady and commanding. "As of today, Tetradyne Technologies will be undergoing a full structural audit and leadership reassessment. The board has approved the transition, and the documents have been filed. You each have a copy of the updated executive structure in front of you." A hand rose. One of the directors, a man named Gregory Shaw, leaned forward. "You're Robert Carter's daughter?" "Yes." "Why didn't we know this sooner?" "Because knowing too soon would have changed nothing." There was a pause. Her words weren't sharp, but their weight was undeniable. Emma continued. "What I observed over the past few weeks was a culture that rewards dominance and punishes integrity. Performance is filtered through bias. Initiative is stifled by hierarchy. Leadership, as it stands, is performative, not productive." Another director, a woman named Elaine Harper, nodded slowly. "And you intend to change that?" "I intend to begin by holding it accountable." Emma stood, walked to the whiteboard behind her, and clicked a remote. A screen lit up with a matrix of internal reports, HR complaints, ignored performance reviews, and anonymized employee surveys. Everything here was gathered without violating company policy. What it shows is a consistent pattern of intimidation, manipulation, and institutional neglect. And at the center of it is a leadership model that must be restructured immediately. There was no yelling. No raised voices. The room remained cold, analytical, corporate. But there was no doubt, this was no longer a discussion. It was a declaration. Emma laid out her plan, 3 phases. First, immediate audit of all department heads and their histories with disciplinary action. Second, reinstatement of previously suppressed employee complaints through an anonymous reporting system, protected by a third-party firm. Third, the suspension and investigation of any executive whose conduct was deemed unethical by legal and ethical review teams. "We are not here to maintain what is familiar," she said. "We are here to fix what has been broken for too long." At 9:30, the meeting ended. No one protested. No one dared. By 10 o'clock, the new CEO was seated in her glass-walled office. Her name was now on the door. The skyline of Manhattan stretched behind her like a silent witness. Charles Becker, still unaware of the change, sat 3 floors below, completely unprepared for what was coming next. At precisely 10:30 that morning, Charles Becker received a curt message from the executive assistant of the president's office, a new name he didn't recognize. The tone was direct, formal, and unfamiliar. "Mr. Becker, you are requested in the executive suite on the top floor at 11 o'clock sharp. Please report directly to the president's office. M. Donovan, executive admin." He read it twice. Blinked. Then smirked. There had been rumors swirling all morning. Something about a corporate shake-up. Directors rushing in through the front doors. A name, Carter, being mentioned in the elevators, though no one was sure what it meant. Charles, naturally, assumed the company was being restructured. Possibly a merger. Maybe some investor flexing his muscles. Either way, nothing he couldn't talk his way through. He fixed his tie, buttoned his jacket, and took the elevator to the top floor as though entering a familiar battlefield. He even hummed to himself as he stepped out into the glass corridor of the executive suite, a place he'd never been invited to, but one he believed he deserved. The receptionist outside the president's office stood and gestured. "Go right in. She's expecting you." "She?" Charles echoed, momentarily puzzled. But the door was already open. Inside, the office was expansive. Windows framed the skyline like a painting. A long desk sat near the center, with 2 armchairs in front. Behind it, seated with unshakable calm, was Emma Carter. Charles stopped mid-step. Emma didn't move. She said nothing. For a second, he didn't recognize her, not because her face had changed, but because everything else had. Her posture was regal, composed. Her suit was immaculate. Her eyes were the same, but they held no trace of fear, no softness, no uncertainty. Only clarity. Charles laughed. Loudly. Very funny, he said, walking forward, still convinced this was some elaborate joke. Did someone put you up to this? Are we filming something for the team building seminar next month? Emma didn't respond. He glanced around. Seriously. This is the president's office. You're in the wrong. Then he saw the nameplate on the desk. And the documents. And the new organizational chart. His voice died in his throat. Emma leaned forward slowly. She didn't smile. She didn't offer him a seat. Mr. Becker, she said, her voice precise, you've been summoned here to discuss your conduct, your position, and your future at Tetradyne Technologies. He stared at her. This is absurd. What is this? A power play? I've been here for over 12 years. I've led record quarters. I trained half the people on the floor. Emma lifted her hand. He stopped talking. On the desk between them sat a thick folder. She opened it. Inside, pages of documented incidents, reports, internal complaints, all carefully dated and indexed. Emma placed a hand over the folder. What you see here is a summary of verified complaints, internal HR documents, recorded testimonies, and flagged correspondence. It paints a portrait of systemic abuse of power, discriminatory language, emotional intimidation, and misrepresentation of employee performance. Charles's face flushed red. I didn't know, if there were issues, someone should have. Emma tilted her head slightly. You were told. Many times. You chose to ignore them. His mouth opened, but no words came out. This isn't a hearing, Mr. Becker, she continued. It's a courtesy. He sank into the chair without being invited. His hands trembled slightly as he looked at the top page, a complaint from a former employee he barely remembered, accusing him of rewriting her evaluations to block a promotion. I didn't think that was years ago. She filed the complaint twice, Emma said. It was dismissed both times. Not for lack of merit, but because of your influence over the internal review process. Charles looked up. His eyes were wide now, a man seeing the ledge where he once thought there was ground. Emma stood, walked to the window behind her, and looked out over the skyline. You've spent years mistaking fear for respect. Obedience for loyalty. Silence for approval. That ends today. He stood abruptly. You don't understand how this company works. There's a rhythm here. A system. I kept people in line. No, Emma said, turning around. You broke people. Charles opened his mouth again, but nothing came out. He saw now, truly saw, the scale of the moment. She wasn't here to argue. She wasn't here to lecture. She was here to end him, not personally, but professionally. She walked back to the desk and closed the folder. Your access to internal systems has been revoked. Your office has been sealed. You will receive the formal documents from HR by end of day. Charles staggered slightly. You can't do this. Emma looked him in the eye. I already did. And for the first time in his career, Charles Becker had no words. Charles Becker stood motionless for several seconds after Emma's final words. The weight of her authority had settled over him like concrete, slow, suffocating, final. Still searching for any angle, any last defense, he lowered himself slowly back into the chair across from her, now less a man in charge than a relic of a collapsing era. Emma took her time. She reopened the folder and removed a slim, black-bound dossier from beneath the stack of complaints. It had no title, no tabs, just a single silver clip holding together page after page of damning documentation. She placed it squarely in front of him. This is a curated summary of your conduct over the past 9 years, she said. Compiled by our compliance team, confirmed by outside legal consultants. He reached for the file with hesitant fingers, but didn't open it. She noticed the tremble in his hands. It includes verified testimonies from former and current employees. Patterns of hostile behavior. discrimination based on gender and age, manipulation of internal metrics, retaliatory transfers, dozens of performance reviews rewritten or delayed to suppress advancement. His voice cracked. Some of those people were underperformers. I had to maintain standards. Emma didn't blink. Then explain the internal messages between you and HR, discussing how to hold off on certain promotions for personal reasons. He didn't answer. She turned a page in her own copy and read aloud. Julie Patterson is too emotional for a leadership role, better to keep her where she won't get ideas. She looked up. That was an actual sentence you wrote to a senior HR manager about a candidate who, 6 months later, left the company. He looked down at the floor. That wasn't how I meant it, Emma interrupted, not with anger, but precision. Intent is irrelevant when the impact is systemic. He flinched. She saw the sweat forming along his hairline. She flipped to another page. You denied a formal complaint from Rachel Torres. Twice. Despite witness reports and corroborating emails. Then you reassigned her to a different department and downgraded her evaluations. Charles's tone turned desperate. She was confrontational. She undermined authority. Rachel was exhausted, Emma replied. And she left the company within the year. We found her. She testified. She let the silence hold for a beat too long. Charles's shoulders sagged. Emma continued calmly. Our legal team has advised that your actions do not constitute criminal offenses in most cases. However, they meet the threshold for professional misconduct. You will not face charges. But your career in this industry is over. He finally opened the folder and scanned the first few pages. His lips moved slightly, as if reading silently to himself, but no sound came. His chest rose and fell faster now. Emma watched him without emotion. She had prepared for this, the collapse, the denial, the moment when a man who believed himself untouchable realized the ground beneath him was made of glass. He looked up, his voice barely audible. Why are you doing this? For them, she said simply. He didn't need to ask who she meant. He knew. The people you bullied. The ones you overlooked. The ones who cried in elevators. The ones who stayed silent because they needed the paycheck. You turned power into a weapon. I'm turning it back into protection. She stood. He remained seated. You may wait here until the escort from Human Resources arrives, she added. After that, your presence on any Tetradyne property will be considered a breach of security. There was nothing left in his face now. No fight. No pride. Just a hollow kind of acceptance. Emma gathered the remaining folders, returned them to her drawer, and closed it with deliberate calm. As she stepped out of her office, the entire executive suite seemed to shift, not physically, but atmospherically. The air felt clearer. The silence was no longer heavy with fear, but with anticipation. The change had begun. The door to the executive office closed behind her with a gentle click, but its echo carried across the quiet hallway like a gavel falling. Emma Carter did not pause. She moved through the corridors of the top floor with quiet certainty, past meeting rooms where directors now whispered, past glass walls that had once symbolized exclusivity but now reflected the face of transformation. Inside her office, Charles Becker remained seated, hollow and unmoving, until 2 members of the Human Resources Department arrived. They didn't speak to him with scorn, nor with sympathy. They simply handed him a sealed envelope, collected his badge, and escorted him out. Downstairs, the 26th floor paused as Charles exited the elevator. Silence fell. He looked around, but no one met his eyes. Even Julie, once eager to bask in his presence, turned away. Donna, the quiet supervisor who had endured years of his dominance, sat frozen at her desk. He walked to his office, but found the door already locked. A member of building security stood nearby and gestured toward the exit. Charles left Tetradyne Technologies at noon, not with a farewell speech or applause, but in total silence, the kind reserved for those who no longer belonged. Back upstairs, Emma remained standing by the window, arms crossed lightly as she overlooked the skyline. She had not celebrated. She had not gloated. The moment had not been about revenge, it had been about principle. And yet, one sentence remained unspoken, one final truth still waiting to be delivered. At exactly 12:15, she called a brief meeting with the executive directors in the main boardroom. They arrived quickly, the air heavy with a mixture of curiosity and caution. They knew what had happened. The whispers had spread across every floor in under an hour. Charles Becker was gone. Emma Carter was now fully, undeniably, in control. She stood at the head of the table. "I won't keep you long," she began. "But there is one thing I need to say, not as a formality, but as a clear mark of where we are now." She walked slowly to the end of the table, her heels silent on the marble floor. She turned toward the window, looking out over Manhattan, and spoke with her back to the room. "You were right," she said, her voice low but razor-sharp. "Anyone can be replaced. Even you." There was a pause. A breath. Then she turned, faced the room, and signed the official letter of termination that had been prepared in advance, placing her pen down with deliberate calm. With that, the final piece fell into place. The room remained quiet. Not out of fear, but because something final had been said, a sentence that had the weight of history behind it, spoken not in anger but with unwavering purpose. Emma left the boardroom without waiting for a response. She had delivered what needed to be delivered. Nothing more. Nothing less. And across the building, in corridors and cubicles, the atmosphere changed. Employees sensed it without needing an announcement. A toxic presence was gone. A new era had begun. The message was clear. Anyone could be replaced. And Emma Carter was no longer invisible. By Tuesday morning, the 26th floor looked different, not in structure, but in spirit. There were no banners or press releases. No speeches or internal memos declaring revolution. Yet everyone could feel the shift. The silence that once clung to the office like a second ceiling had lifted. People spoke more freely, moved more confidently. And at the heart of it was the woman who now walked among them without pretense or spectacle. Emma Carter had not returned to her old desk. She no longer needed to. But instead of isolating herself in the glass-walled office upstairs, she spent the day walking through each department, clipboard in hand, speaking softly and directly to the people who had been overlooked for years. Her first action that morning was the implementation of the anonymous reporting system, an external platform secured through a third-party ethics firm. The announcement, short and direct, appeared in every inbox at exactly 9 o'clock. Beginning today, all employees are encouraged to report any past or present incidents of misconduct. These reports will be reviewed independently, with full anonymity guaranteed. Retaliation will result in immediate termination. That was all. No branding. No corporate fluff. Just a promise. Reports began arriving within the hour. Emma spent that day and the rest of the week meeting quietly with employees who had once been considered non-essential, the junior analysts, night shift support agents, and administrative staff who had long been excluded from conversations about company direction. She asked questions. She listened. She took notes. No one had ever done that before. Donna, once merely a footnote in the operations chain, was invited into the HR restructuring sessions. Her insight into employee turnover proved essential. She was later promoted to Director of People and Culture. Leo, the soft-spoken analyst who had quietly endured Charles Becker's dismissive oversight, was transferred to the systems integrity team, his data visualizations now driving policy change. Emma handed him a personal note that read, "Your voice matters here now. Speak freely." Julie, who had mirrored Charles's behavior to survive, was not punished but reassigned to a new team under a different leader. Emma watched her carefully, not with judgment, but with the understanding that fear breeds imitation, and redemption requires opportunity. But not everyone was given the same grace. Over the next several days, 3 middle managers were placed on administrative leave following preliminary findings from the reports. 2 more resigned before the investigations could begin. The quiet departures sent a message louder than any internal memo: complicity had consequences. Emma also announced the formation of a rotating employee council, 12 members, elected every 6 months, drawn from every level of the company. Their role would be to represent the workforce directly to the executive office. "I will not lead in isolation," she told the council on its first day. "And I will not allow leadership to become untouchable again." The culture of fear that had once permeated every department began to dissipate, slowly but undeniably. Meetings were no longer dominated by a single voice. New ideas were no longer met with immediate dismissal. Employees who had once stayed silent now volunteered perspectives. It was not utopia. But it was a start. Emma made no effort to hide her presence. She was seen in the cafeteria, seated with maintenance staff. She asked for feedback after presentations. She walked through hallways without entourage or formalities. She opened her door, and more importantly, she listened when people walked through it. One evening, as she walked through the operations floor, she noticed a small framed photograph on Donna's desk, a picture of the support team from 5 years earlier. Half of those faces were no longer with the company. Some had been pushed out. Others had simply given up. Emma studied the photo for a long moment. Then she turned to Donna and said, "Let's find out where they are. And let's see if they want to come back." A week later, 3 former employees had been rehired. One of them, Rachel Torres, returned as an advisor to the ethics committee. Emma's leadership was not loud. It was precise. It was deliberate. And, most importantly, it was felt. She was no longer the invisible girl in the corner. She was the one rewriting the rules. Despite her new title and the authority it commanded, Emma Carter remained true to the quiet strength that had guided her since the beginning. She did not retreat into the trappings of corporate luxury, nor did she seek praise. Her days were long, her decisions bold, but her actions always intentional. And perhaps nothing symbolized that better than where she chose to eat lunch. Every day at noon, without fail, Emma left her office on the top floor and took the elevator down to the ground level, not to meet with partners or dine in private boardrooms, but to sit in the main employee cafeteria. She chose different tables each time. Some days, she joined junior analysts, discussing weekend plans. Other times, she sat with janitorial staff, maintenance workers, or call center agents halfway through their shifts. She listened. Not politely, attentively. One Monday, she sat beside a cafeteria worker named Clara, who had been with Tetradyne for nearly 20 years. Emma asked her what had changed over the years. Clara hesitated at first, then spoke carefully. "Before, people just tried not to get noticed. You didn't want to stand out, not even for doing a good job. Praise came with risk. It made you visible. And visibility got you in trouble." Emma nodded once. "And now?" Clara smiled faintly. "Now, we breathe differently." That same afternoon, Emma joined a group of warehouse employees in the company's South Bronx logistics facility. They were reviewing outdated inventory software that had been ignored for years due to budget deferrals. Emma didn't bring a speech. She brought a notepad. After listening for 20 minutes, she said, "Send me the top 5 frustrations with this system. Not the tech problems, the real ones. The things that make your job harder." By the end of the week, the system's contract was renegotiated. A new platform was implemented within 2 months. Her influence spread, not through force, but through consistency. She spoke often about impact, rarely about legacy. Her father had once told her, "A leader who talks about legacy is often trying to convince themselves they've done enough." Emma was not interested in statues. She was interested in structures, the kind that endured beyond applause. The board of directors, initially skeptical of her appointment, had come to respect her not out of obligation but necessity. Quarterly performance reports improved. Employee satisfaction soared. And public perception of Tetradyne shifted, not because of a flashy rebrand, but because whispers of internal change had begun to echo outside. Journalists took note. Articles appeared with titles like "The Quiet Overhaul at Tetradyne" and "The CEO Who Started in the Shadows." But Emma refused all interview requests. She didn't need to tell her story, not yet. Instead, she focused on expanding the internal mentorship program she'd quietly piloted during her second month. Employees from all levels were now paired with executive mentors, including herself. She personally coached 3 employees each quarter, selecting them not for their performance metrics, but for their unseen potential. When asked why she still took time for individual mentorship as CEO, Emma answered simply, "Because I remember what it feels like to be ignored." The comment was shared in a company-wide newsletter, and it landed harder than any performance graph. Even those who had doubted her at the beginning had come to understand, Emma Carter was not just the daughter of a billionaire. She was a force on her own. And unlike the leaders who had ruled before her, she did not forget where she came from, not just in bloodline, but in experience. She remembered every late-night ticket she closed. Every insult she absorbed. Every colleague who winced under a superior's glare. Every story whispered over coffee or in a hallway between meetings. Because she had lived them. And she had chosen to come back, not for revenge, but for reform. By the end of her first year as CEO, turnover had dropped by 30%. Internal mobility had increased. And the culture of silence had been replaced by one of cautious, growing trust. Emma's name was no longer whispered. It was respected. Months later, in a large auditorium filled with entrepreneurs, students, and industry leaders, Emma Carter stood at the edge of a sleek stage, holding nothing but a handheld microphone and the attention of over 800 people. She was the keynote speaker at a leadership summit titled "The Future of Organizational Integrity." Her name had been on the program for weeks, and yet, the mystery around her remained. Most of the attendees had never heard her speak in public. This would be her first time telling the story herself, not filtered through articles or anonymous sources, but in her own words. She didn't begin with a dramatic entrance or a presentation deck. She simply stepped forward, her voice clear, her expression calm. "Let me tell you a story," she began. "About the day I was called useless in a room full of people." The room quieted instantly. I was new. I sat in the back of meetings. I was told to keep quiet. To do the bare minimum. To not get in the way. I was laughed at, not behind closed doors, but openly. Publicly. It wasn't personal. It was systemic. That's how culture works when it's left unchecked. She paced slowly, not for drama, but rhythm. I remember the laughter. The looks. The moment I realized that no one saw me as anything more than a placeholder. She paused, then smiled, not bitterly, but knowingly. And what they didn't know was that the company had already been sold. A quiet ripple passed through the audience, that familiar moment when a story tilts and everyone leans in. They didn't know I was the daughter of the man who now owned the entire building. They didn't know I was there to observe, to listen, to understand what leadership really looked like from the bottom. She let the silence stretch. And then came the day, she continued, when the man who called me useless was asked to meet the new CEO. Soft laughter stirred. He walked into my office, still believing it was some kind of joke. Still laughing. Still in control. Emma looked out over the crowd. And when he finally stopped, when he finally realized it was real, when he understood who I was, she stopped walking. She stood still at the center of the stage. I looked at him, she said. And I just said, "You were right. Anyone can be replaced. Even you." The room held its breath. And then I just said, "Welcome to the future of this company." Silence. Then, a sudden, rising swell of applause. It was not polite. It was not routine. It was a standing ovation that grew not from admiration alone, but recognition. Of justice. Of clarity. Of restraint met with resolve. Emma nodded once in acknowledgement, then waited for the applause to settle. She closed her talk with a final thought. Leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about hearing the quietest one. It's not about taking power. It's about earning trust. And it's not about legacy, it's about leaving the door open behind you. When she stepped off the stage, many rushed forward to meet her. But she moved with quiet certainty, just as she always had, disappearing into the crowd, leaving behind a silence that meant something very different than the one she had walked into months before. It was no longer the silence of being ignored. It was the silence of being remembered.